want to talk about immigration. Haha, to America. I was listening to one of my favorite shows. It's on NPR. It's called News and Notes with Farai Judea, and they were talking about this issue, and they tossed around it a few times, and finally somebody said it. Basically, a lot of black folks have a lot of issues with um, immigrants, including Africans who've come to America more recently, because I don't think that there's due knowledge, first of all, and respect for the contributions that African Americans have made to American society. And I think on a very basic level, because a lot of immigrants actually are people of color, um, a lot of African Americans don't feel like those people of color or majorities where they come from oftentimes, that aren't sensitive enough to the role that we have played in allowing immigration to continue from all those different places. America has had very racist immigration policies, including ones directed at people where I'm sitting right now here in India and China. I mean, when you start saying that you only want the professionals or in the professionals that only feed into your needed social segment at the time, well, I know that for a lot of people who come to America and seek a lot of opportunities, that's a great opportunity. And when I think about some of the things that I read about caste here in India, even for a Brahmin, maybe it brings some relief to get out of this system. But I think that what African Americans feel is that there isn't enough brown, yellow, red dialogue. You know, there isn't, and not just at schools like Oberlin where I went, where there was all kind of so-called people of color identity politics. That's a pretty privileged situation to be in with a lot of very wealthy people. But what about those who are in different economic situations, who are almost categorically, systematically excluded from going to an Oberlin college, if not only because they can't afford it, but because it just was never on the horizon from the get-go. And we all know how Jim Crow schools and public schools go. So African Americans, having seen this transition from being in bondage, chattel slavery, and the seamless transition to Jim and Jane Crow, and the seamless transition to a post-civil rights era, it's difficult for us to believe that racism is about individuals per se, but about the system. And it's that system that remains in place. And I'm not so sure that the sort of democracy that we have is not categorically irredeemable, in the sense that we need to think about coalition governments as a different form of democracy and a way to represent minorities. And I don't think that because we can't say that we've built a nation on these, on foundations as solid as these rocks. It's solid, but it was born out of domination, genocide of the native peoples through transatlantic slave trade, you know all this stuff. So it's not as if, African Americans have seen in our cultural history a great shift. And the fact is, not enough Americans know about our contributions, including us. So when I say this, we have a consciousness about it, and we pass it on intergenerationally, but other people don't have these stories. Other people simply don't have the knowledge of who we are and what we did. I mean, I told a group of high school kids today that, I was an adult before I learned a great deal about African American history that just continues to fascinate me, about who we are and how we lived and how we survived. I mean, I think I was an adult before I read Ain't I a Woman by Sojourner Truth. I knew many other things. I knew who Toussaint Louverture was, and I know that America exists and speaks English because of someone like Toussaint Louverture, but I know that there are lots of people who have no idea who he was. So I grew up in an environment where I played him in school plays, or after school plays, because black folks organize and teach their kids like that. But it's just amazing that this rift will exist, because I don't think that it's easy for black folks to give up the idea that racism is a dominant ideology working in our lives today. And so when you start to become a critical thinker, then you see the same system of domination applied in so many different areas. You see people portrayed in ways that are convenient to them. And so when immigrants come to America and find jobs that they say that African Americans are too lazy to do, and toe that line, even with the so-called wetbacks from south of the border who come from a more varied, economic standing than perhaps people who have to cross an ocean. Well, as soon as like those people start saying that African Americans are lazy and African Americans don't want to work and that we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, well, immediately we see that they've bought that line, because that line of thinking stems from the same line of thinking that at one time justified our enslavement, and one time it justified an apartheid system, and at another time, justifies that African Americans simply don't want to work and pull themselves up. And I'm so tired of putting videos on YouTube and answering people's questions about why don't African Americans just do this, that, or the other. Oh my God, you need to just read a book. I can, if you would like to know, if you have any questions about why African Americans just don't lift themselves up and why, we still have these disparities in economic wealth, social wealth, why we're unable to transfer wealth from generation to generation like other people, even more newer immigrants to America can. Why can't we? There are some books that I can recommend to you, but there's some authors just off the top of the head. Read Toni Morrison. Gosh, she'll tell it to you in a narrative. Or read Bell Hooks, she'll tell it to you straight up. But the point is, how do we reconcile this? Because, as I say, when I look at how America is relating to the rest of the world at this present time, it's that same system of domination. So is that the freedom that people are looking for in America, or the freedom to define oneself? So the freedom to buy into generic American, pop cultural politics, and what? Be the next best Britney Spears? Or do you just say that Britney Spears is not my ideal of beauty? Which even I think she rejects, which is part of Homegirl's breakdown, that she's tired of being America's blonde bombshell. Maybe she just wants to be a real woman. And, as opposed to someone like Madonna who says, well, you know what, if you're going to look at me because of my hot white pussy and my blonde self, I'm going to get rich and I'm actually going to remain critical all along. Many routes that you could take, but when people don't recognize contributions of African Americans, and I always say, well, how could they? How could they know this history? It does not behoove the wider, whiter audience in America, the so-called non-working class people, the people whose lives are comfortable, and the people who have bought the line that their hard work and their comfort, their level of comfort, them just being on the edge, are also those people who think that, who buy this, that, if everyone worked as hard as me, then everything would be okay. Well, I believe in hard work, but I also believe that there are larger structural influences at work here, and it's not just around race. It's around a system of, white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist hegemony, all of that. And it's not that deep, that's what we would call it in perhaps an academic circle, but, my little cousins could talk about this. And the fact that people come to these shores and don't get to learn about this history is actually, it's very harmful, because, well, look where it leads us. Because you can have, I'll say Iraqi people immigrate to America, and yet we're so ignorant of Iraqis. So much so that we can bomb it and destroy it. And people still don't even question the fundamental absurdness of war. It's always just, I'm right and you're wrong, and God's on my side. That's how absurd that line of thinking gets you. So learn what black people have to say. And we as black people have to take the responsibility to create ways for people to know our aspect and our vision of American history, American presence, and America's future. So I do claim Barack Obama, for example, as a black person, even though he's only half black, but culturally he's black, which also says something about how race and hierarchy are constructed in America.
Tu marches comme un lion